Hi everyone, welcome to this YouTube channel or welcome back to this YouTube channel. My name is Levicosijn and today I am speaking with Anthony Lewis. Hi Anthony, how are you?
Hi, good to see you.
Today we're going to talk about primary directions. This is our second session. In the first session we discussed right ascension, oblique ascension, and then the horizontal plane, the ecliptic plane, and the equatorial plane. If you're new to this technique, you can check out part 1 first. And so today we're going to continue our discussion and we're going to look at some examples.
Please interrupt if anything's not clear. Questions help. What I did was after our last discussion, I went through it and made a note of areas I thought could be clarified further or needed more explanation. And that's how I prepared the slides. So first slide, this, just to clarify some of the terms we were using. This is the celestial sphere, and this is a person standing inside it in the center. And so he is standing on a plane, which is his horizon, right?
Yes.
Vertically straight above him is his zenith, and straight below him would be his nadir. And the zenith touches this circle, the meridian circle, which is a circle that goes from the North Pole through his zenith, down through these circles to the South Pole. And so his meridian is where the sun would be at exactly noon local time. It's where the sun is directly in the center of the sky at his location. And you can see
it's also the point that determines the north point, the most northern point on the local horizon.
Yes, well, the northern point is here, the southern point is here. This is the horizon that he's standing on. The sun travels around the Earth on the ecliptic, in a geocentric view. So you can see here's the sun, every 30 degrees is a new sign. And so this is the path of the sun called the ecliptic. It's tilted with respect to the horizon, and it's tilted with respect to the Earth's equator or the celestial equator, always 23.5 degrees, almost exactly that. And so these three angles are going to determine how things appear on your flat horoscope that we look at, right? So the equator, as we said last time, here's the North Pole, here's the South Pole. The Earth turns on the equator. The equator has a uniform movement around the axes of the Earth. So it functions like a clock. So every 2 hours is 30 degrees on the equator. But it's not 30 degrees on the ecliptic because of this angle.
Yes.
Okay. So those are the important points. The equator acts like a clock. Every 2 hours is 30 degrees, every 1 hour is 15 degrees, and every 1 degree is about 4 minutes. It's not exactly 4 minutes because the Earth is not only spinning, but it's moving along its axis. So it's kind of the effective precession. So these are important concepts and we'll come back to them.
Because you say it's about 4 degrees. Is that one of the...
About 4 minutes.
Excuse me, 4 minutes. Is that one of the reasons why it is not considered giving very accurate to the day results? I mean, is that one of the reasons, one of the causes?
Well, yes and no, because you can adjust, you can calculate the exact number of minutes it takes for 1 degree of the equator to
exactly. So that's my question. Why wouldn't they do that in the first place? Why not really make it exact?
The difference is very tiny. I mean, I have a slide that shows the difference. It's so slight. It's really 3.989 minutes as opposed to 4 minutes. That for practical purposes, it's not going to make much difference unless you get to be very old. And it's kind of the same difference with precession. Every 72 years, there's a 1 degree difference in where the sun returns. And so it's the same. It's every 72 years, if you're measuring 1 degree for 4 minutes, you're going to be a degree off in your measurements. which because we're equating 1 degree on the equator to 1 year of life, your timing's going to be off by a year every 72 years.
So, for example, if I'm getting married on October 12th, let's say, that's not going to be seen in primary directions. You're going to see, all right, it's going to be within 6 months.
You'll see it
within the year.
Only within 6 months to a year, yeah.
6 months. And that's the best you can.
But there's no guarantee it will be exact. And there's many, many reasons for that. So it's more like a dasha in the Indian system. It's a time period. For instance, the sun, for example, if you look at it in the sky, it's about a half a degree wide. So for half a degree, which is equivalent to half a year, the sun is crossing the midheaven. The body of the sun is actually on the midheaven for half a year.
Yes.
Because it's half a degree. Each degree is a year. So at some point in that half year, something may occur. But how do you pinpoint when in that half year? You have to look at other timing techniques.
Because the dasha system, of course, uses the subdivisions, which allow it to actually go, quite exact.
Right. Yeah, and it's a similar thing. If you have a primary direction, you're talking about a time period, and then within that time period, you have to use other techniques to pinpoint.
Other techniques, okay.
And commonly they use the solar return to do that.
Sure, yes, makes sense.
Okay. This slide, I just summarized the whole talk last time. So let me read it because this is a summary of what we said last time. The Earth rotates on its axis. This is called the primary motion. The sky appears to rotate from east to west because the Earth's rotating west to east. And this gives rise to primary directions. Because of the daily rotation of the Earth in the hours after birth, the natal planets appear to rise, culminate, set, and anti-culminate as the Earth turns, the sky turns. If we view the natal chart as a map, then the apparent motion of the heavens after birth carries the natal planets and points around this map in a clockwise direction. The stationary points on the map are called significators, and the moving points are called promissors. And when a promissor reaches a significator by this primary motion, we say a direction has formed, and we interpret it symbolically. And 1 degree on the equator crossing the midheaven in just under 4 minutes on an ordinary clock is considered symbolically equivalent to 1 year of life. This is a great site. It's at the University of Nebraska. They have all these animations of the heavens, and they're really good. They really help you see what's going on. So let's start here. This is the celestial sphere. Here's the Earth in the middle. And someone is standing on the Earth, this person here. So the Earth is going to turn from west to east. And this is the equator in the middle. So I made a little video from this side, and what's going to happen, the Earth is going to move, and then from the point of view of the guy on Earth, you're going to see the heavens moving here. So I click animation, and you can see the Earth is moving, so the sky appears to be moving around him, north, south, east, west, as the Earth turns here from west to east. And then I'm going to add some stars over here. I'm going to add the constellation Orion, which straddles the equator. Right, so it appears to rise in the east, culminates at its midheaven, sets in the west, goes under the horizon, comes back around. Then Orion, the star group, will arise again here. And so these are basically your primary directions, things that start here and rise here. So the primary directions are just things that planets and points that come in this direction counterclockwise and connect with natal points as they connect. Those are the primary directions. I slowed it down here so you could see. Let me stop it for a minute.
So the Earth is there going from west to east, and then
the Earth turns west to east, so the sky appears to go east to west. And this is the sky's meridian.
Exactly.
North to south. This line here is very faint, but this would be his prime vertical.
Yes.
And this would be his zenith up here.
Zenith is there in the crossing, yes.
Right. So if this star in Orion was significant, like it promised something at birth, it's heading here. When it reaches his meridian, something would be likely to occur in his life. And we know the timing because we see how much time it is from here to the midheaven on the equator, and we convert that to years. Shirley Temple. For those who don't know her, Shirley Temple she's dead now, is an American actress. She was a child actress born in 1928, I believe, very popular in the 30s and 40s, pre and post the World War II. If you don't know her, I'm sure your parents do. She was internationally well known, adorable, cute little girl who was in a lot of films from Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
When she got older, she got involved in politics, became an ambassador of the United States, and I think also to the UN. And she's also well known because she was one of the first women with breast cancer to go public and talk about her diagnosis and her treatment and make it possible for women to be open about breast cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And she's known for that. So I thought it would be useful to look at her primary directions for the time she got diagnosed and was treated for breast cancer. She was 44 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, she was 44 and a half years old when she had the surgery. And I think she got diagnosed right around her birthday when she was 44. So that should show up in primary directions in some way. This is her birth chart. So she's born in 1928, April 23rd, in California, Santa Monica. Any clues to breast cancer? Well, her ascendant is Jupiter.
Mm-hmm.
Her sixth cusp is ruled by Venus, and she has Pluto in the eighth in the sign Cancer, which rules the breasts.
Mm-hmm.
And Pluto is exactly square her Venus, ruler of the sixth. So you might expect a health problem at some time in life related to Pluto in Cancer, the breasts. And Pluto's a modern symbol associated with Scorpio by modern astrologers. He's god of the underworld, often associated with the medical profession, with surgery, with radical transformation and healing. So it makes sense from her natal chart that something like breast cancer could occur to her in her lifetime. So we might ask by primary direction. Remember, primary direction means that everything in the chart is moving clockwise.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything that's roughly 44 degrees, because she's 44 years old when this happens, away from an angle? Because the angles are the most potent significators. Well,
Mm-hmm.
Pluto here would come down to the horizon in roughly 44 degrees on the ecliptic. It's probably a little more than that, 6 Gemini to 6 Cancer would be 30, and then that's 15, so 39.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
39 is close to 44. So where I'm guessing, if we did the primary directions, that Pluto would be on the horizon at age 44.
Mm-hmm.
And so let me look at the next slide. So here I just looked at the heavens at the time of birth, just to show visually how things look. So this is her natal chart if we looked at the sky. The green line is her horizon. So her ascendant and descendant are on this line. The blue line is the equator, which measures time.
Yes.
This line in the middle is her meridian, so her midheaven's up here.
Mm-hmm.
In Stellarium, which I use, you can't really see Pluto because it's such a tiny magnitude. So I had to draw an arrow to where they indicated it would be.
Mm-hmm.
It's below the ecliptic.
Yes.
So as the sky moves, remember, the sky is moving in this direction. This area is going to come down to the horizon.
Mm-hmm.
And what's going to happen is because Pluto is below the ecliptic, the body of the planet is going to meet the horizon before the projection on the ecliptic does.
Yes.
Remember we talked about that last time?
Yes. Yeah, people can check it in part 1.
What we're interested in is when does Pluto, either the body of the planet itself or its projection onto the ecliptic, reach the horizon, because they're both significant events astrologically. Because we think the ecliptic is a very important circle, and we make a lot of predictive statements from the ecliptic only, but we can also make predictive statements from the body of the planet. So my guess is that either the point on the ecliptic, the projection on the ecliptic of Pluto, or the body of Pluto is going to get here in 44 degrees as measured on the equator.
Yes.
We have to project these down to the equator to measure time. I took her birth time, which was 9 p.m. She was born right on the clock here. Makes it easier for us. She was born 9 at night. And I multiplied 44 by not 4 minutes, but I used what's called the Nibod correction. What the medieval and Renaissance astrologers found is when they used Ptolemy's measure of 1 degree is 1 year, often it didn't time events correctly. They were often off by several months or a year. So Nibod was this, I'm not sure which century he was, 16th century maybe, astrologer, German astrologer. And he reasoned the problem with Ptolemy's measure is that Ptolemy is viewing the year as if it had 360 days in it, that each degree was equal to a day, which was the old Egyptian system of calendars. They had a year of 360 days. Then there was an intercalary period before the new year started. And in that period, they would worship the gods and have religious festivals, and then begin the next 360-degree years at the end of this intercalary period. So it's somewhat like what we do as moderns with, we have the holiday season around Christmas time, and we start the new year January 1st. So effectively, if you're working, and if you have a good job with lots of vacation, you get a lot of Christmas holidays, so you have that intercalary period, and then you start the new year January 1st. So it's a similar idea. Ptolemy was working as if the year had just 360 days, 1 day for each degree. And Nibod said, well, really, that's not true, because there's 365 and a quarter days in a year. So the real ratio is we have to take 1 degree, or 360 degrees divided by 365 and a quarter, and get the true ratio. And if you do that, you get 3.932 minutes per year instead of 4 minutes per year on the equator. Because the real year is bigger than the 360 degrees, the 360 day year.
Sure.
The ratio dividing 360 by 365 and a quarter would give you not 4 minutes per year, but 3.932. So I took her age at the time she had the breast cancer removed, which is 44 and a half. I didn't include the chart, but let me just describe it. If you move this forward by 44.5 years times 3.932 minutes per year, Pluto comes exactly to the horizon.
All right.
So that it shows that the timing is close. It's not exact, but it's close within a month or two. That's quite impressive.
That's close, yeah. And especially like a kind of a Mahadasha.
Right. Now, what I was doing in this chart is she also died in 2014. So she died at 85.8 years of age. So here I took the 85.8, multiplied it by the 3.92 minutes per year, and that gives me 342 minutes. And so I moved her chart forward by 342 minutes from 9 p.m. I took her birth chart, added 342 minutes, and that gave me a chart April 24th, the next day at 2:42 in the morning. And this should correspond to the day she dies, actually. Now, it's not a dramatic, there's nothing really dramatic here. The thing that struck me is she has this very close Pluto square Venus in her birth chart. And at the time she dies, this moves to aspect very closely the midheaven MC-IC axis, the meridian axis. This point here, the IC, is associated with death because it's the point furthest under the earth, and it's symbolically linked to the grave, cemeteries and the grave, where you go when you die, is this point here. And so you can see that her natal Venus, let me get the exact degree of her natal Venus, because we usually don't, her natal Venus is 1531. In primary directions, we usually keep the natal positions of the planets. We don't advance them.
Yes.
So 1531, and she dies when Venus is sextile. This is 1532, so it's almost exact. I mean, it's 1 minute off. So that's a clue that she could die. Also in her directed chart, Venus is now ruling the 8th house of death. In her natal chart, Venus was ruling the 6th house of illness. So the symbolism is there for death.
I also, as a side, it's very interesting. In Vedic astrology, we discussed this earlier. We have the 2nd and the 7th house being the Marakas, the killer houses.
Right.
So we have our ascendant lord is in the 2nd house, with Mercury, the 7th lord, and the sun is the 6th lord.
Right. So
and Venus, the 8th lord, is very close. See, so her ascendant lord is packed or is in between all these killer connotations.
In primers, you're looking for exact measurements. So here, Venus natally is at 1531, and here it came to 1532. You're within probably a week of her death. So that's very, very close. But in primaries, you keep the natal positions. You should use these degrees instead of, I had advanced degrees because I was advancing the chart. They don't change very much. Like Venus went from 31 to 49 minutes. But for timing, you want to use, the tradition is to use the natal degrees.
Sure, yeah.
Now, the other thing, the traditional idea was that you keep the natal chart fixed. These are significators. It's a map. You let the planets move around to get primary directions. But there was something called converse directions, which traditionally meant you could also allow the angles to move forward and keep everything else fixed. It's harder to show that with the animation feature on a computer. You have to do that more with calculation. But for instance, suppose in her chart, Neptune met something significant. You might want to know, when will the midheaven, by primary motion, means moving like a clock, get to Neptune? If we knew the right ascension of Neptune and the right ascension of the midheaven, we could calculate it exactly. We just subtract. Let's assume that the right ascension is the same as the ecliptic, which it's not. It's going to be a little bit off. So 17 to 26 is what, 9. So maybe at 9 years old, she gets an important role in the film industry, which would be Neptune. Okay. So this would be called a converse direction, because we're taking what normally would be a significator, meaning the angle, and letting it move to a planet. Right. And it's easy enough to calculate if you have an ephemeris with the right ascension. But I would say roughly 9 years old, and that fits. She's a child actress, so she probably starred in some important film around age 9 or 10, if we measured her. Now, in terms of death, one way to measure death is to look at her ascendant ruler, which is Jupiter, and ask when will it reach either the 8th house cusp or the ruler of the 8th. Now here, because primary motion is this way, and each quarter of the chart is about 90 years of life, she'd have to be like, 270 years old for Jupiter to get here, right? So that's not practical. That's not going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But modern authors had this idea of measuring backwards in time and called those converse directions. So that 2 years before you're born corresponds to age 2. 3 years before you're born corresponds to age 3. So it's like time is going out in concentric circles from your birth in this modern idea of converse directions. So if we could measure backwards and ask, in the past, when was Jupiter conjunct the 8th cusp, which could indicate the time of her death, that easily could be about 85 degrees. So conversely, if we can move backwards in time, we could ask when before her birth was Jupiter on this 8th cusp. It looks, eyeballing it, that could be 85 years, the time for death.
But why do you take the 8th cusp, Anthony? I mean, why don't you take the 7th cusp of, where the sun sets?
You could do where the sun sets, but in Western astrology, the 8th really is considered the beginning of the house of death.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the 7th will show death as well because it's sunset.
Yeah.
But more traditionally, it's the 8th that's used. So what I did was, I did her converse direction. Again, she died at 85.8 years of age. So it's the same figure, 342 minutes. But instead of adding it to her birth time, I subtracted it from her birth time. So she is born at 9 p.m. If I subtract 342 minutes from 9 p.m., I get a time about 3:18 in the afternoon. So this is the chart for her birthday, but at 3:18 in the afternoon instead of 9 p.m. And look what happens. Jupiter, her ascendant ruler natally, is pretty much exactly on the 8th cusp, 2036, 2043. And that correlates very closely with her time of death.
Interesting.
So, and the symbolism fits, and when we do the math, it fits. The other thing I noticed about this chart, remember we talked about Neptune before, possibly being Hollywood. Neptune here is pretty much exactly on the 12th cusp. The 12th is a house of loss, dissolution, and has to do with endings. And Neptune is a planet of dissolution and sort of spiritual journeys. So she's on her final spiritual long journey here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also then you can say again, the first Lord, Mercury, is also in the 8th house then.
Right.
Yeah.
And the sun and
with the 7th Lord, which is also again the Maraka. Yeah. Okay.
So this is how they work. It's usually not exact, but it's usually close.
Why would you go in reverse? What's the logic?
It's a modern idea. I think it probably developed in the 18th or 19th centuries. And it has to do with the concept of time. How do you envision time? Is it linear? Does time move linearly? Or is time more concentric? And this is actually more consistent with a Vedic notion that there are past lives that affect the present. So that if time ripples out from your birthplace in concentric circles, something that occurred, say, 27 years before your birth will reflect itself in your chart done 27 years after your birth. So this is also done with solar returns. And it makes some sense logically too. Say, for instance, if you look at the solar return a year before your birth, that should reflect something about the conditions of your prenatal life, your life in the womb, because you were conceived during that solar return year. You were conceived the year before you were, within the year before you were born. So if you cast your solar return a year before you were born and compared it to your natal chart, that should tell you things about what was going on in your family, what was going on in the world around you, and so on. Maybe what your parents were going through if you look at the parental houses and so on. Yeah. And also I found this works in relationships, especially close marriage type relationships. If you look at your solar return before birth that includes the birthday of your partner and compare it to your I guess current chart, it will give you a sense of how you and your partner will get along. It's very interesting.
That's very interesting.
Because the solar return for that year is sort of a symbol of events that occurred in that year that are important in your life. And say your partner's born, I don't know, 40 years ago. You find which solar return going backwards in time your partner's birthday would occur in. It's probably your 39th solar return before your birthday because your partner's 40 years ago, right? So it'd be 39 to 40 because you're going backwards in time. And then look at that solar return and compare it to your birth chart, and that may give you some sense of how the relationship will be.
Yeah, we could do that at some point.
Do it as an experiment. Take a famous person. It's an interesting exercise. And it's not just partnerships, it's important events. The solar return encapsulates important events for that year as they relate to you personally. So if you compare your birth chart to the solar return, it should give you a sense of what's important about that year for you personally. But we're getting off the subject.
Sure. I was just thinking, I mean, if you look at previous, like the concept of rebirth, I think the concept of going back in time is interesting to give a past life reading or something, what those people also do, which can be very worthwhile, probably many people are skeptic about this.
Yeah, but just to follow along these lines, obviously your parents are very important for you because if they weren't here, you wouldn't be here. So if you look at the solar return for the year one of your parents was born and compare it to your birth chart, there theoretically ought to be a symbolic importance of that year, because if your parent wasn't around, wasn't born that year, you wouldn't be here. So it's a really important year for you, right?
I know we're diverging a little bit, but it's interesting. Just see, in Vedic astrology we have the Dwada right? Which is a D12 chart, which deals with your ancestors.
Ah, okay.
But also it deals with what is evolving. What are you evolving towards? It's a very important chart. There's a lot of mystery around it also. And I think you also have it in Hellenistic astrology, right? The 12th part.
Right. Yeah.
Which also has to do with that. So I think that this is a very important division to study and to understand. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the idea of converse, this modern idea of converse directions is similar to the idea of converse solar returns, in that what occurred before you were here, before your birth, obviously will influence your birth in some way, because the past influences the present. And so one way to look at the past is to look at the charts. What do the planets look like in the past, and how do they compare to the present, your birth chart?
Yes, and that is the idea. The concept is very clear. Now, how is it that we can look at the birth time of a person, then go back in time to see what her death or his death would be like? I mean, that's the link I'm trying to understand more.
Well, in a sense, the death of any of us is determined, at least in part, by what went before us. If your parents were heavy alcoholics and damaged their bodies and then conceived you, that probably would have some effect on your body, because, or if they were heavily into drugs or something. I'm making an extreme example. And we know that just from medicine, children born to addicted mothers have a really hard childhood, and often they have educational problems. Their brain doesn't develop normally. So that what your parents were doing in the years before they conceived you is going to affect your life, your health, and probably the way you die in some way.
Sure, but that's the parents, right? I mean, like for example, in this chart, we just went back in time to look at this woman's death.
Right.
So it's from her horoscope we're looking at.
Right.
This.
So well, let's go to her. This is her birth chart. Right? And so we know right away from this birth chart, Pluto is somehow connected to her death. Venus is, because it's square to Pluto, and Jupiter is too, because it's square. So is Mercury. These are all square to Pluto, right?
Yes.
And so whatever these meant in the past are going to affect the way she dies. And so we can look at what they were doing in the past to get a sense of how they'll affect her future death. We're just connecting the past with the present with the future. There's a continuum and a development. That's what we're looking at. Or, I mean, another possibility, if you look at it on a more global level, let's say, you know, she has Pluto, and suppose Pluto were square, which it partly is the Uranus. You might say this has to do with some global conflict like World War II and the Nazi concentration camps. Well, certainly if she was a Jewish woman or from a Jewish family, the fact that there was a war involving armies and Hitler could affect her life. That's not what happened in this case, but I'm just giving a hypothetical. Sure. And so if we go back in time, we might see something more clearly about how those planets relate and related before she was born, which then gets carried forward to her present. In horary astrology, we have a principle that aspects that occur before the time of the question that have already happened indicate what has happened in the past.
Yes.
And aspects that are about to occur in the near future indicate what will happen in the near future about the question. So there is this continuum. You look at previous aspects for what's been going on before, and look at future aspects or what's going to happen in the future. It's the same idea.
Right.
People, if they have the software, are going to see converse directions. And I just want to make the point, there are two types. They both work, but they're slightly different. Now, if we did the normal converse direction, the traditional converse direction, we might also argue that when the midheaven, if it were allowed to progress with the sky, it eventually will reach Pluto and it will eventually reach this cusp. These are points at which she could die, or it will reach the moon, which rules this cusp. So here are 3 points at which we could say death is possible. We wouldn't say it's certain, but we would say it's possible, and then we'd look at other techniques to sort of pinpoint. But as you can see here, from 17 Virgo, 17 Leo, we'd have to measure this in right ascension to see when this might be.
Right.
I mean, this actually might be the breast cancer more when the midheaven reaches the Pluto, because that looks more like about 45 degrees to me.
Yes.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be death. It could be a serious life-threatening illness also. But the point is, with primaries, the symbolism is going to be there, and it's going to be fairly close in time, usually within months. This is her birth chart. She's born at 9 o'clock at night. So the theory of primary directions is simply that as time moves after birth, all these planets are going to move in this direction, clockwise around the clock. And these are called the promisors, the promising points. The significators are the fixed points. When any of these natal points or planets reaches a significator, we expect something important to happen in her life. And the timing is just simply the rotation of the Earth, a complete cycle roughly every 24 hours. or roughly 1 degree, roughly every 4 minutes. So this is going to tick every 4 minutes, tick, 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 tick. And we're going to, a new degree will be on the midheaven, and that represents a new year of life. Okay, so this is Shirley Temple's chart, and she's born at 9 p.m. And this is the animate feature. It lets me move the chart forward any amount of time I want. Let's move it forward the Ptolemy rate to show you what Ptolemy would have done. Let's say that 4 minutes is 1 degree, is 1 year of life, even though that's not going to be exact for the reasons I said earlier. So what I'm going to do here is, it says step by number of minutes. I'm going to put 4 in here. Okay. The idea being, as Ptolemy said, roughly in 4 minutes, we'll move the midheaven 1 degree. And that will correspond to 1 year of life. And what I'm curious about is, when will Pluto get here? Because I think that has the correlation with her breast cancer.
Yes.
So I hit this arrow, and you can see it moved 1 degree on the midheaven. This is age 1. Age 2, we moved another degree. Age 3, we moved another degree. Age 4, another degree. I'm going to do this real slowly. Age 5, another degree. Age 6, another degree. Notice at age 6, her nodes crossed the ascendant. So that should have been a significant year for her. And remember, she was a child star. She was like a movie star around this age.
Yes, the 7th house there, the public.
Yeah. So that's age 6, age 7, age 8, age 9, age 10, age 11, age 12, age 13, age 14, age 15, age 16. Notice Saturn crossed here at age 16. This is the year she met this guy and ended up marrying him at age 17. And then a couple of years later, she had a baby. So she had a very early marriage. And that probably correlates with the age 7. This is 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. We're at 23. I didn't point out that Uranus crossed here, the IC, a couple of years ago. And it's when she divorced the guy that she got married to at age 17. 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. Here we are at 30. 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, 36, 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44. She's diagnosed with breast cancer. 45. Notice Pluto jumped between 44 and 45. That's when she had her mastectomy. Okay, let's go to age 85. Let's see. 45, 46, 47, 48, 49, 50. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 60. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 70. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 80. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So here is the year she dies. I remember we said the Venus, we're not measuring exactly because you're using the 4 minutes, is aspecting her midheaven. Actually, she died at 85.8, so it's closer to 86. And so, yeah, she dies right on time. Venus exactly aspects her midheaven about the time of her death.
Saturn is on it. Saturn is also squaring Mars. And we have all the Maraka stuff that we were talking about as well.
Right. Now, if we went in the other direction, we'd find that Jupiter came to here at the time of her death. In modern converse directions, we're moving the chart backward in time. 1 degree of right ascension for every year of life, but going backwards instead of forwards.
Yes.
And the idea, as I understand it, is if you think of throwing a pebble into a pond, where the pebble land is your birth, and then time radiates out in all directions from that pebble in concentric circles. And so 5 years in the future is in the same concentric circle as 5 years in the past. Then 6 to 6, 7 to 7, 8 to 8, and so on. And so by looking backwards a certain number of years, you're getting kind of a reflection from the past that many years forward. And the idea is whatever happened in the past that many years ago has a resonance with what will happen so many years in the future from your birth. It's used with solar returns in Western astrology. It's used with directions and progressions. I don't know if it's used elsewhere. And I think it's fairly modern. I think it really was the 18th, 19th century astrologers in Britain who came up with it. It may have had some influence from the Vedic tradition because of the ideas of reincarnation and repeating past lives, that what you did in the past affects your present and affects your future.
Yeah, so there's many techniques to reading, like past life, doing past life readings, but really going back in the chart that linearly, there's also this, I don't know if you know this system, human design, which is also doing that. This is also based on, one of the things is they go, I think, 82 days back in time to make some calculations.
Let's take her birth chart, 9 o'clock at night, and move it backwards in time 4 minutes for every year of life and see what happens. And we'll do the same procedure as we did, but I just moved to 17 on the ecliptic, 16. I moved back, now she's the year before she's born. So this is the year she's conceived by her parents. I don't know if there's anything interesting going on.
Her parents could be connected to second house stuff, also the ninth. All right, the ninth, of course. Yeah.
Right. 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years before birth, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So this is the year of her marriage. They ended up in divorce a few years later. 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. 31, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 40. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the year of her breast cancer, and this is the year of the surgery for it. Nothing really stands out that much to me except the moon on the ninth cusp, and it's aspecting the ascendant very closely. And so this is a year. Actually, her breast cancer makes the news. She becomes an advocate for women with breast cancer. Makes a lot of sense. She publicizes the fact that she has it, that she's had a mastectomy. And so she's got the moon ruling Cancer, ruling the Pluto, ruling the eighth, trining the ascendant.
Yes.
So she's publicly letting people in on her private affairs.
Do you also look at anticyons and contra-anticyons in relating to the natal positions of these prefective?
You could, yeah, you could. That's another level. Here we're at 85. Time of her death, she's almost 86, and Pluto's right on the eighth cusp.
The year that before she was born. I think her
1 year before she was born?
Yes. I think the parents are in the fifth house making children or something.
Well, let me go back here.
If I'm not mistaken. I mean, if that would be...
I think this is her birth chart, right? And you want to go back 1 year. So this is a year before she's born. This is her primary directions.
Yeah. And so we have the ninth Lord Sun in the fifth house. I mean, the ninth is considered the parents, right? Both parents. And then they're making babies in the fifth house.
Right.
So, and Jupiter is also in the fifth house.
Mm-hmm.
And Jupiter is also the Lord of the mother. And the 10th Lord is the Mercury also. So we have Jupiter and Mercury, the parents. All parents' indications are in the fifth house.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in summary, let me move this chart back. This is the birth chart of Shirley Temple. And the idea of primary directions is very simple. You let all the planets, you let the sky basically move around the Earth as the Earth rotates after birth, so that everything moves in a clockwise direction. And in 24 hours, there'll be one complete rotation.
Mm-hmm.
And we let each degree of right ascension crossing the midheaven be a year of life. And that's approximately 4 minutes of time. So that every 4 minutes that passes after birth corresponds to 1 year. Because there's 90 degrees of right ascension from the ascendant to the midheaven, this would correspond to 90 years of life. So most people's lives will fall into this area.
Mm-hmm.
And we're looking for connections between the rotating planets when they connect with the natal planets or positions, especially with the horizon or the midheaven, which are the two most powerful points. And also to the house cusps. These are Placidus house cusps.
Mm-hmm.
I chose those for a reason. In the Placidus system, the houses are 2 planetary hours apart.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is 2 hours exactly planetary hours. This is 2 planetary hours, and this is 2 planetary hours. And because Ptolemy is measuring in terms of movement of the chart measured on the equator, we're measuring in planetary hours, which has to do with how long it takes signs to ascend over the horizon. So
Yes.
I know that when a point gets from here to here, it's gone 30 degrees exactly on the equator, or it's moved 2 planetary hours.
Mm-hmm.
And so because the Placidus houses are so closely linked to this system, and the Placidus semi-arc system, it helps me visually to estimate when things will occur. I mean, you could, if you have a different house system that you're familiar with and you like, you can certainly use that. The house cusp are really significant points. They kind of condense the meaning of the house. So, for instance, I use the 8th house cusp in Western is a house of death. So the concentrated meaning of death here is right at the cusp. So when something gets to the cusp, I expect death to be a meaning. And I looked for when Jupiter, which rules the ascendant, the person, the life of the person, gets to the 8th cusp, death is a high possibility. It's not a guarantee, but it's a high possibility. And we saw with the converse directions measuring backwards in time, the modern technique. At 85.8 years when she died, Jupiter was pretty much exactly on the 8th cusp by primary direction. So it fit very well.
All right. Cool.
Okay.
I think we can wrap it up here, and we'll go to the next part 3. We're gonna
Part 3 next time.
Bruce Lee's horoscope or Trump.
Bruce Lee and a little of Donald Trump.
Okay. Thank you, Anthony.
Okay. My pleasure.